So we have the results from the Brexit vote, and the people of Britain have decided to leave the European Union. So they won with about 52% of the vote, beating Remain by over 2 million votes. And the immediate fallout here has been both incredibly interesting and also exactly as I predicted. I told you guys that one of the downfalls of the Leave camp would be immediate economic consequences, and again, economic consequences in the short run. Whether or not that'll transfer into the long run is a longer conversation. But let me go ahead and give you some facts here as to what happened in the fallout of this vote. The FTSE, the London Stock Exchange that is, lost 122 billion pounds, or about $170 billion, like that. Gone. That's incredible. That is a gigantic plunge. The Swiss Central Bank has now intervened in currency markets to limit the franc's rise amid the carnage. So they're basically controlling their own currency because it's going haywire as a result of what happened here with the Brexit vote. The UK could now lose its AAA credit rating, which would be a disaster, of course, if they do. The pound plunged to, get this, a 31-year low. They say it went down the equivalent of 18 cents. Oh, for one night, that is unbelievable. Even some online currency sales were totally suspended. And overnight, Britain lost its place as the 5th biggest economy in the world. It's now been replaced by France. So this is big news. This is big news. But again, look, it really was predictable in the sense that the markets were going to react harshly if indeed they decided to make this change and leave the European Union. So leading up to the vote, you had the pound was actually surging because everybody thought that, oh, Remain is going to win, because I think the most recent polls indicated that Remain was going to win. So the pound rallied, and then that was destroyed, and then some, and now it's at a 31-year low. So the governor of the Bank of England had to come out and basically promise a bailout of 250 billion pounds to quell the market fears. Obama this morning, he came out and he was like, no, understand, we're still with Britain. We love you, Britain. If you want to cuddle, we can cuddle, whatever. Please stop the markets from crashing. So Obama came out. He's like, oh, no, it's all good. It's all good. Because remember, previously Obama had said, look, if you guys leave, there's going to be consequences. I'm not saying that, except now that's exactly what I'm saying. Shinzo Abe of Japan came out and said the same thing. He's like, look, man, we invest in Britain because Britain is a gateway to the rest of the EU. You're out of the EU, we're basically going to divest from you. So again, world markets are responding to this, and they're responding harshly to the point where you've almost seen some world leaders do a complete turnaround, and they're like, oh, wait, did we say we're against leave? No, I guess we're for leave as long as it'll make the market stop crashing. God damn it. So it gets better, though. The Prime Minister, David Cameron, came out and he gave a speech. Let's see what he had to say.
But the British people have made a very clear decision to take a different path. And as such, I think the country requires fresh leadership to take it in this direction. I will do everything I can as Prime Minister to steady the ship over the coming weeks and months. But I do not think it would be right for me to try to be the captain that steers our country to its next destination. This is not a decision I've taken lightly, but I do believe it's in the national interest to have a period of stability and then the new leadership required.
He's resigning. He's stepping down. Damn. So for those of you who don't know, David Cameron came out in favor of Remain. You also had the head of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, favor Remain. And you had, it was UKIP and the far-right parties who were like, okay, we want to go. So with them losing, he's like, all right, well, I guess I'm going to step down here. Now, not only that, Nigel Farage, one of the leaders of the Leave movement, went on TV this morning, and there's already some backpedaling over some of the promises that the Leave campaign made.
The £350 million a week we send to the EU, which we will no longer send to the EU, can you guarantee that's going to go to the NHS?
No, I can't, and I would never have made that claim. That was one of the mistakes I think that the Leave campaign made.
Hang on a moment, that was one of your adverts.
Well, it wasn't one of my adverts, I can assure you.
Well, that was one of the Leave campaign's adverts. That money was going to go to the NHS.
And I think they made a mistake.
That's why many people have voted.
They made a mistake in doing that. But what I can tell you is we have a nice
You're
feather
saying
bed.
after 17 million people have voted for Leave, based, I don't know how many people voted on the basis of that advert, but that was a huge part of the propaganda. You're now saying that's a mistake?
We have a £10 billion a year, a £34 million a day featherbed that is going to be free money that we can spend on the NHS, on schools, or whatever it is.
But you're not guaranteeing that that money, as promised, will go to the NHS.
You must understand, I was ostracised by the official Leave campaign and as I've always done, did my own thing.
Do you think there are other things that people will wake up this morning and find out aren't going to happen as a result of voting this way?
Well, I tell you what they will find out, that we're back to being a normal country, in charge of our own laws, and able to start making our own relationships with the rest of the world, maybe even re-engaging with the Commonwealth.
So, it's going to be a weird next few years because as a result of this, Britain basically needs to renegotiate all of its trade deals with the EU. Remember, over 50% of their exports go to other EU countries. So they're going to have to renegotiate their trade deals, try to get a good deal that's either equal to or better than what they have now, which might prove difficult because the EU has showed signs that now they might be punitive as a response to this. So it's not like, okay, you did the vote and then now freedom and everything's hunky-dory. And a lot of the arguments that were in favor of Leave, I mean, they were iffy to begin with because it wasn't like the outcomes that they said would happen are guaranteed to happen, like basically what he's alluding to here with funding the NHS more. So one of the arguments was sovereignty and border control and immigration and stuff like that. But again, understand that you still need to trade economically. And in order to trade economically, still many of your exports, over 50% of your exports go to the rest of the EU countries. They could just say to you, we're not going to trade with you unless you keep the borders the same as they are right now. In which case, you made this move to have more control of your borders. And then they tell you, well, if you want to even have a basic functioning economy, you're going to have to leave the borders as they are right now. So you left to control your borders, but effectively you're still not going to be able to control them as much as you want to control them. So it's tough, man. It's tough. And I don't want to, boil down the Leave campaign to only people on the far right and bigots and xenophobes and stuff like that, because that's not true. There's also many people on the populist left who are like, no, we should leave. So, for example, George Galloway was in favor of the Leave campaign, among many others. It's not just him. And they make an argument that's kind of a mirror image of one of the arguments that the right-wing Leave people make, which is, look, we're prevented by the EU from making radical left-wing change, too. Because if we decide to make a radical left-wing change and go further left, well, we can't do that because there's still EU bureaucracy that we have to deal with, and we're not really calling all the shots. So it's really not as simple as, and I'm seeing this a lot on Twitter, and it's kind of sickening, where people are just trying to boil this down in a really partisan, hacky way, where it's like, all good left-wingers are for Remain, and that's the end of the conversation, yeah. And, all good right-wingers are for Leave, and that's the end of the conversation. No, there is a little bit of crossover. Statistically, overall, yes, it is true that people on the right, or the far right, I should say, more favor leaving, and people on the left and younger people more favor staying, but there is some political crossover here, and that shouldn't be overlooked. So, for the Leave campaign, look, part of it was based on xenophobia and bigotry and controlling the borders and sovereignty and independence, but also part of it was based on, this anti-establishment fervor and this idea that, hey, the EU is calling all the shots. We don't want them calling all the shots. We want to control our own fucking country. We're anti-establishment. And there was a great point made in a Vox article about this where they say, look, a lot of people on the anti-TPP left in the United States can understand where the Leave campaign is coming from because they also don't want to be involved in these shitty trade deals that end up fucking over their own country. Yeah, I sympathize with that, man. I do. But then remember, the Leave campaign also has, like I keep saying, the immediate negative response of a snap downturn, like an immediate recession, I think a higher unemployment. Obviously, the pound has already tanked tremendously. So it's not like it's consequence-free. And again, the question in my mind boils down to, if you're in the Leave campaign, did you want to risk having a terrible few years here, an immediate downturn to maybe bounce back later? Or do you just want to coast as you're coasting right now, remaining in the EU and trying to work out your problems through more traditional channels as opposed to going nuclear? Now, they apparently chose, hey, we want to leave, and it is what it is, man. You got to respect it. You know, they made the decision. You guys know, you can go watch the original segment I did on Brexit. I leaned in favor of remain, but I do see some very valid arguments in the camp that says we should leave. So now they left. The immediate results are not good, but we have to wait and see what happens in terms of how they can renegotiate their trade deals, in terms of how much control they do end up having over their borders, how much more sovereignty they do get. In the long run, how they bounce back. Like I said, immediate downturn, but will that last? And perhaps the weirdest and most off-putting part of this move is the domino effect. Because this opens up the door to, in the wake of this, now Scotland, it hasn't even been a day yet that Britain voted to leave the EU, and now Scotland is saying, let's have a referendum on independence again. Remember, they recently had a vote on independence. Now they're saying again, well, they left, so now we want to have a vote on independence, and obviously they want to have a vote on independence from the UK. That's their thing. And then now Ireland, somebody in Ireland, I guess a prominent political figure there, came out and said, now we want a referendum on a united Ireland. Remember, of course, Northern Ireland is part of the UK, and this guy says, well, let's have a vote, and maybe Ireland wants to become part of a united Ireland again. So it could be the great unraveling here, and it could be we move more and more across the European Union towards isolation, towards separation. And look, man, it was a tough project to begin with because at least like in the United States, when people try to make that comparison, the United States, it's all a common language, it's all a common culture, there's kinship with the American flag, even though it's, you know, where conservatives and liberals, and there are giant differences. But, you know, when you talk about the EU, I mean, it really is amazing. What a fascinating place it is, because in Europe in general, it's like, okay, you drive so many miles that way, all of a sudden people are speaking a different language. It's a radically different culture. You drive north, people are speaking a different language, radically different culture. And to bring that together and have integration, it's like you can't half do it. And that's another weird potential upside of this is either this leads to the great unraveling and everybody gets more separate and isolationist, or it leads to Britain bows out as they did, and then that allows the rest of the European Union to actually come together, because one of the few things that was preventing them from further integration was Britain. Because, for example, with the euro, Britain said, no, we're not going to be part of the Eurozone. We're not going to use the euro. We're not going to have the same currency. We're going to have our own currency. So now perhaps the rest of the European Union can go in the opposite direction and say, well, now we can integrate more and we can become more of this unified thing, as opposed to what Britain did. So we can go in the polar opposite direction. But again, it's yet to be seen. And if anything, the evidence now indicates the other direction, where, again, with Scotland and Ireland, and I'm sure others are going to come out where they say, well, if they left, why can't we do our own thing? So it's a big day, man. I mean, that's huge news. Huge news. Britain is leaving the European Union. So we'll see what happens in the long run. They could bounce back. They could be better off. We don't know. But in the short run, the facts show that this does have the immediate downturn effect as predicted.